The blood drained from my face as I stood in the doorway of my kitchen, watching my 7-year-old twins sob into their grandmother's lap while she stroked their hair with a satisfied smile curling at her lips. The words I'd just heard her whisper to them still hung in the air like poison. "Your real mother didn't want you, sweethearts, but at least Chanel took you in." My hands trembled as I gripped the doorframe, my knuckles turning ash gray against my dark skin. The grocery bags I'd been carrying hit the floor with a thunderous crash, glass shattering, milk spreading across the hardwood in a white pool that crept toward the living room. Good day, everyone. I am grateful you are here with me. Before we begin, I would really love to know where you are watching from. Comment your city below. Now let me tell you about something that changed my life forever. My daughter Skylar looked up first, her brown eyes swollen and red, mascara-like tear tracks staining her cheeks. My son Terrence kept his face buried against his grandmother's cardigan, his small shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I felt my heart splinter into pieces sharp enough to cut through my chest cavity. "What did you tell them, Patricia?" My voice came out low, dangerous, each word measured and deliberate. My mother-in-law stood slowly, smoothing down her navy dress with deliberate movements. Her silver hair sat perfectly coiffed, not a strand out of place despite the chaos she'd just unleashed. She placed one hand on each twin's head, a possessive gesture that made my stomach turn. "Only the truth, dear. They deserve to know." I crossed the kitchen in 4 strides, glass crunching beneath my sneakers. My pulse hammered in my temples, adrenaline flooding my system so completely that my fingertips tingled. I positioned myself between Patricia and my children, my body a wall of protection, my arms spread wide to shield them from her view. Skylar grabbed the back of my shirt, her small fists twisting the fabric. I could feel her trembling against my legs, could hear Terrence's ragged breathing as he crawled behind me to join his sister. The weight of their fear pressed against my spine, ignited something primal in my chest that burned hotter than rage. "Get out of my house!" I pointed toward the front door, my arm rigid, my entire body vibrating with barely contained fury. Patricia's lips curved into something approximating sympathy, but her eyes remained cold, calculating. She collected her purse from the counter with unhurried precision, checked her reflection in the microwave door, applied fresh lipstick with 3 practiced swipes. They needed to understand their place in this family. "My son made a mistake marrying you, and those children—" "Out!" The word exploded from my throat, primal and raw, echoing off the walls with enough force that Patricia actually flinched. She moved toward the door, her heels clicking against the floor with infuriating slowness. At the threshold, she paused, glanced back over her shoulder with that same poisonous smile. "Malcolm will hear about this tantrum." The door closed with a soft click that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. I collapsed against the door the moment Patricia left, my palm pressed flat against the wood, as if I could physically prevent her from ever returning. My chest heaved with each breath, the air burning in my lungs. The house seemed to hold its breath around me, every sound amplified. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant tick of the living room clock, the soft whimpering coming from behind me. I turned slowly, my legs unsteady. Skylar sat on the kitchen floor where she'd crumpled, her arms wrapped around her knees, rocking slightly. Terrence stood frozen by the counter, his Superman action figure dangling from his hand, his 8-year-old face pale and confused. Mascara-stained tears tracked down Skylar's cheeks, and she looked up at me with eyes that had aged years in minutes. "Mommy?" Her voice cracked on the word, small and broken. I dropped to my knees and pulled them both into my arms, holding them so tightly I could feel their heartbeats against my chest. Skylar buried her face in my shoulder, her body shaking with silent sobs. Terrence remained rigid, his small form vibrating with tension he didn't understand how to release. "That woman is a liar," I whispered against Skylar's hair, breathing in the coconut scent of her shampoo. "A cruel, hateful liar." Terrence pulled back first, his jaw set in a way that reminded me painfully of Malcolm. He wiped his nose with the back of his hand, squared his shoulders like a little soldier preparing for battle. "Why did Grandma say those things?" The question stabbed between my ribs. I cupped his face in my hands, forced him to meet my eyes, needed him to see the truth burning there. His skin felt warm beneath my palms, real and solid, and mine. "Some people say terrible things when they're angry, when they want to hurt others." I smoothed his hair back from his forehead, the gesture automatic, maternal. "But it doesn't make those things true." Skylar lifted her head, her eyes red-rimmed and searching. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. The words seemed to catch in her throat, too terrible to voice. I released them both and stood, my knees protesting. The kitchen looked different now, contaminated by Patricia's poison. The cookies she'd brought sat on the counter in their cheerful tin, and I grabbed them with both hands, hurled the entire container into the trash can with enough force that it bounced against the bottom with a metallic clang. My phone buzzed on the counter. 3 texts from Malcolm's mother, then 2 more in rapid succession. I didn't read them. Instead, I grabbed my purse from its hook, dug through the contents with shaking hands until I found what I needed. The hospital records, the birth certificates, the documents I'd kept because mothers always kept these things. Papers that proved everything, that showed my name as mother, Malcolm's name as father, dates and times and footprints preserved in fading ink. I spread them across the kitchen table, smoothing the creases with trembling fingers. Skylar approached slowly, Terrence following close behind. They stared at the documents like ancient texts requiring translation. "Look." I pointed to Skylar's birth certificate, traced the date with my finger. "June 14th, 7:43 in the morning. You weighed 7 pounds, 2 ounces. You came out screaming like you were angry at the world." Skylar leaned closer, her finger hovering over the paper without touching it, as if it might burn her. My phone erupted with another series of buzzes, skittering across the granite countertop like an angry insect. I snatched it mid-vibration and powered it down completely, the screen going black with a decisive click. The silence that followed felt thick, viscous. Terrence picked up his own birth certificate, holding it at arm's length as though the distance might help him process the information. His jaw worked side to side, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood when wrestling with difficult math problems or basketball plays that wouldn't stick in his memory. The paper trembled slightly in his grip. I moved to the window above the sink, gripping the edge of the counter so hard my knuckles blanched. Outside, Mrs. Chen from 2 doors down walked her terrier past our mailbox. Normal Tuesday afternoon, sprinklers rotated in lazy arcs across the Johnsons' lawn. A delivery truck rumbled past. The world continued its mundane rotation, while mine splintered apart. The refrigerator hummed. The ice maker dropped cubes into its bin with hollow thuds. These ordinary sounds felt obscene now, inappropriate witnesses to our crisis. "Why would they say that?" Skylar's voice emerged barely above a whisper. I turned from the window, found her staring at me with those eyes. Malcolm's eyes, the same deep brown with flecks of amber visible in direct sunlight. She had his chin, too. That slight cleft that became more pronounced when she clenched her jaw, which she was doing now. Because they want Malcolm back, and they'll burn everything else down to make that happen. I crossed to the table, began gathering the documents into a neat stack. My hands had steadied somewhat, muscle memory taking over where emotion failed. I'd organized papers for 40 years, medical records at the clinic, household bills, tax documents, finding comfort in order when chaos threatened. Terrence set his birth certificate down carefully, precisely aligned with the table's edge. He stood and moved to the living room, his basketball shoes squeaking against the hardwood. I heard him drop onto the couch, the springs protesting his weight. Through the doorway, I watched him pull out his phone, his thumbs flying across the screen with the fluid speed of his generation. "Don't engage with them," I called out. "Not yet." He didn't respond, didn't look up. The tapping continued, rapid fire. My chest constricted. At 23, he thought he could handle this, thought his words could fix things. He didn't understand yet that some people came armed with matches and gasoline. That reason meant nothing to those determined to watch things burn. Skylar remained at the table, her fingers now tracing the embossed seal on her birth certificate. She'd always been tactile, needing to touch things to believe them real. As a toddler, she'd examined everything: leaves, rocks, fabric textures, with an intense concentration that suggested she was cataloging the world through her fingertips. I moved to the coffee maker, dumped out the cold dregs from this morning, and started a fresh pot. The ritual required no thought: filter, grounds, water. The machine gurgled to life, beginning its transformation. I needed something to do with my hands, needed the bitter comfort of caffeine to sharpen my thoughts beyond their current state of numb fury. My phone lay dark and silent on the counter. I imagined the messages piling up inside it like floodwater behind a dam. Patricia would be spinning this now, calling family members, deploying her version of events to anyone who would listen. She'd always been skilled at that, crafting narratives where she emerged sympathetic, blameless, the misunderstood victim of others' unreasonable behavior. The coffee maker hissed and spat. Dark liquid began trickling into the carafe, filling the kitchen with its sharp, almost medicinal scent. I pulled 3 mugs from the cabinet, lined them up on the counter with military precision. Terrence appeared in the doorway, his face illuminated by his phone's glow. "Dad's calling me." "Don't answer it." "He's my father." The words came out defensive, almost aggressive. "Then let him be your father instead of his mother's puppet." I poured coffee into the first mug, watching steam curl upward. "Let him come here, face us directly. If he wants to talk, he can show up." Terrence's phone went dark. He stood there, backlit by the living room lamp, his tall frame filling the doorway. He had Malcolm's build too, long-limbed, broad-shouldered, the kind of athletic proportions that had made Malcolm a star point guard in college. Looking at my son now felt like watching a ghost, seeing the man I'd married superimposed over the boy I'd raised. The phone lit up again. Terrence stared at the screen, his thumb hovering over the green button. The muscles in his forearm flexed and released. He let it ring through to voicemail. The sound of gravel crunching under tires cut through the kitchen's tense silence. Headlights swept across the living room wall, casting skeletal shadows of window frames that slid and disappeared. I set down the coffee pot harder than intended. The glass bottom struck the counter with a sharp crack that didn't quite break it. Malcolm was here. My hands moved automatically, reaching for the dish towel, wiping already dry counters in tight circular motions. The engine cut off. A car door opened with its distinctive hollow thunk. Malcolm's Lexus, the one his mother had helped him finance when his own business couldn't cover the down payment. Another thing Patricia had held over us, another thread in her elaborate web of control. Footsteps approached the front door. Heavy, deliberate. Not the quick stride of the man who used to bound up our walkway after work, eager to be home. These were the steps of someone preparing for confrontation, each one planted firmly as if claiming territory. I moved toward the foyer. Terrence still stood in the doorway between kitchen and living room, phone clutched in his hand like a talisman. Beyond him, through the front window, I could see Malcolm's silhouette on the porch. He wasn't alone. Two other figures flanked him, shorter, rounder. Patricia and Gerald had come too. My heart hammered against my ribs. The dam I'd imagined earlier cracked wider. They were bringing reinforcements, mounting a siege rather than attempting reconciliation. This wasn't about healing the damage. This was about winning. The doorbell rang. No knock, no courtesy of announcement, just the electronic chime that always reminded me of a game show buzzer. "Don't." Renee's voice came from the stairs. She descended silently, her feet bare on the carpet. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry now. Her jaw set in a way that reminded me of myself at her age. Determined, defiant, done with tears. "I have to open it." "Why?" She crossed the living room in quick strides, her oversized sleep shirt rippling around her thighs. "Why do you have to let them in? They came here to gang up on us. You know that's what this is." The doorbell rang again, held longer this time. Aggressive, impatient. I moved past her, my hand reaching for the deadbolt. The metal was cool under my fingertips, smooth from years of use. I'd locked this door 10,000 times, created a barrier between my family and the world outside. Now I was about to remove it. Let the threat walk straight in. The door swung inward. Malcolm stood centered on the welcome mat, his face illuminated by the porch light I'd installed last spring. Behind him, Patricia's perfectly styled silver hair caught the light like spun metal. Gerald lurked at her shoulder, his hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, looking anywhere but at me. "We need to talk about this situation rationally." Malcolm spoke first, his voice carrying that carefully measured tone he used in business negotiations. Not the voice he'd used in our bedroom this morning, raw with frustration and defensive anger. "Rationally." I repeated the word, let it hang in the air between us. "Is that what you call lying to our children about their own existence?" Patricia pushed forward, inserting herself between Malcolm and me. She was shorter than me by 3 inches, but she drew herself up, chin lifted, eyes flashing with righteous indignation. "We did not lie. We simply shared information that you've been keeping from everyone." Information. My fingers tightened on the doorframe. Wood grain pressed into my palm, rough and real. "You told them they were adopted. They are not adopted. That's called a lie." "We said they might be." Patricia's lips compressed into a thin line. "Given how different they look from Malcolm, how different their temperaments are." I stepped forward. She stepped back. The movement was instinctive, primal. I'd never physically threatened this woman in 26 years of knowing her, but something in my face must have conveyed how close I was to crossing that line. "Mom?" Malcolm's hand landed on Patricia's shoulder, pulling her back another step. "Let me handle this." "You haven't handled anything." The words came out sharp as broken glass. "You stood there while she poisoned our children's minds. You came home and defended her. You chose her side over your own wife's, over your own kids." Terrence moved into my peripheral vision, positioning himself slightly behind me and to my left. A united front. His phone was no longer in his hand. Both arms hung loose at his sides, but his fists were clenched, knuckles prominent. Gerald finally spoke, his voice thin and reedy. Patricia was just concerned. The children seemed confused about certain things, and she thought it would be better if they knew. Knew what? Renee appeared on my right, creating a wall of 3. That we're not really part of this family? That Mom probably cheated on Dad and were someone else's kids? Is that what we needed to know? Patricia's face flushed deep red, the color creeping up from her neck in blotchy patches. How dare you speak to me that way? I am your grandmother. I deserve respect. You deserve what you give. Renee's voice shook, but she didn't back down. Which is nothing. Malcolm pushed past his mother, crossing the threshold uninvited. His shoulder brushed mine as he entered. Not hard enough to be a shove, but firm enough to assert his right to be here. This was his house too, legally. His name on the deed beside mine, his income that paid half the mortgage. He turned to face us from inside the foyer, his back to his parents now. Kids, go upstairs. Your mother and I need to talk, privately. Nobody moved. I stepped forward, closing the distance Malcolm had created. My sneaker squeaked against the marble tile, the sound sharp in the tense silence. The pulse in my neck throbbed so hard I could feel it against the collar of my shirt. They're not going anywhere. My hand found Renee's shoulder, gripping it firmly. Through the fabric of her sweatshirt, I could feel her trembling. Your parents lied to them. They get to hear whatever comes next. Malcolm's jaw worked side to side, grinding his molars. A vein bulged at his temple, snaking down toward his ear. He'd worn that same expression when the hospital bills came in, when my mother got sick, when money got tight. Always the same calculation behind his eyes. How to control the situation. How to minimize damage to his comfort. Patricia swept into the house behind him, her heels clicking an aggressive rhythm. Gerald shuffled after her, pulling the door closed with a soft click that felt louder than a slam. The 4 of them now occupied my foyer, their presence invasive, oppressive. The space suddenly felt smaller, the ceiling lower, the air thicker. This is absurd! Patricia's handbag swung from her arm as she gestured broadly. Malcolm, control your wife. This behavior is exactly why we had concerns about the children's parentage in the first place. Such volatility, such aggression. My vision blurred at the edges. Heat flooded through my chest, radiating outward until my fingertips tingled. I released Renee's shoulder and moved toward Patricia, my body acting before my brain caught up. Terrence's hand shot out, catching my elbow, anchoring me. Don't! His voice was low, meant only for me. Not worth it. But my feet kept moving, dragging him forward a step before I stopped. I stood close enough to Patricia to smell her perfume, something expensive and cloying, gardenias mixed with powder. Close enough to see the fine lines around her mouth, deepened by years of pursing her lips in disapproval. Get out of my house. Each word came out measured, controlled. My hands hung at my sides, fingers splayed wide, then curling into fists, then releasing again. You don't get to come here. You don't get to defend what you did. Patricia's eyes narrowed. She lifted her chin, looking down at me despite being 3 inches shorter. This is Malcolm's house too. We're here at his invitation. Malcolm shifted his weight, his dress shoes scuffing against the tile. He didn't confirm or deny it. His silence was confirmation enough. I turned to look at him. Really look at him. The man I'd married 23 years ago had laugh lines around his eyes, shoulders that relaxed when he came through the door. hands that reached for mine across the dinner table. This man, this stranger wearing Malcolm's face, stood rigid, arms crossed over his chest, everything about his posture screaming defense of his mother rather than his family. You invited them. Not a question. A statement of fact that settled in my stomach like concrete. He looked away, focusing on a point somewhere past my shoulder. They called. They were upset. They said you'd been sending them threatening messages. Threatening? Renee's voice pitched higher. Mom asked them to tell the truth. Enough! Gerald's shout startled everyone. The mild-mannered man who'd spent 35 years letting his wife speak for him suddenly had volume. His face had gone from pale to mottled pink. This family is falling apart because nobody respects authority anymore. In my day, children didn't question their elders. Wives didn't contradict their husbands. There was order, structure. Terence laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. In your day, people like Mom couldn't even drink from the same water fountain as you. Maybe your day sucked, Grandpa. The words hung in the air, crystallizing everything. Gerald's mouth opened and closed wordlessly. Patricia's hand flew to her chest as if she'd been struck. Malcolm's face drained of color, his eyes going wide. I grabbed Terence's arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. He wanted to say more, to push harder. But this revelation was enough. It had been lurking beneath every holiday dinner, every awkward conversation. Every time Patricia asked if the twins had my real hair texture. Every comment about their skin being so much darker than Malcolm's. I think we're done here. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Malcolm, you have a choice to make. You can stay with your parents, or you can stay with your family. But you don't get both. Not anymore. He stared at me, his mouth working like he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. His hands uncrossed, reached toward me, then dropped back to his sides. Behind him, Patricia grabbed his elbow. Malcolm, let's go. We'll find a lawyer first thing Monday morning. You don't have to tolerate this treatment. My husband looked at his mother, then at me, then at his children. 30 seconds passed. A minute. The grandfather clock in the living room ticked steadily, marking each moment of his indecision. Then he turned toward the door. The sound of Malcolm's footsteps on the hardwood floor echoed through the entryway like gunshots. Each step deliberate, measured, moving away from us and toward the door where his parents waited. My chest constricted, ribs pressing inward until breathing became a conscious effort. I forced air through my nose, counted to 3, released it slowly. Terence's body went rigid beside me. His arm tensed under my grip, muscles coiling tight as steel cables. I felt the tremor run through him. Rage, grief, disbelief, all mixing together in his 17-year-old frame. Sienna made a small sound, something between a gasp and a sob, her hand flying up to cover her mouth. Malcolm reached the door, his fingers wrapped around the brass handle. The metal clicked as he turned it, and cold November air rushed into the house, carrying the smell of dead leaves and rain. Patricia moved to stand beside him, her posture triumphant despite her carefully arranged expression of maternal concern. Gerald followed, adjusting his coat with satisfaction. Malcolm. My voice came out raw, scraped from somewhere deep in my throat, not pleading, not angry, just stating his name like a fact. He froze with the door half open. His shoulders hunched forward, and I watched the back of his neck turn red. That telltale flush I'd learned to recognize over 23 years of marriage. Shame, conflict, the physical manifestation of his internal war. His head tilted slightly, turning maybe an inch in our direction, but not enough to see us. The silence stretched. Wind whistled through the gap in the doorway, scattering leaves across the threshold. They skittered and scraped against the wood with dry, brittle sounds. Patricia's hand hovered near Malcolm's back, not quite touching, but ready to guide him forward. Then something shifted. His shoulders straightened. The red flush spread from his neck up to his ears, creeping across his skin like spilled wine. He released the door handle and turned around completely. "Get out." His voice was quiet, directed at his parents. Patricia's face transformed, features contorting with shock. "What did you say?" "I said, get out of my house." Malcolm moved away from the door, each step back toward us more assured than the last. "Right now." Gerald's face darkened to a dangerous purple. "Now you listen here, boy." "No." Malcolm cut him off, and I heard something new in his voice. Something hard and final that I'd never heard before. "You don't call me boy. You don't call me anything. You came into my home and lied to my children. You tried to destroy my family." Patricia grabbed Malcolm's sleeve, fingers digging into the fabric. "We were trying to save you from your mistake, from her people who—" Malcolm jerked his arm away so forcefully that Patricia stumbled backward. The movement was pure instinct, violent and sudden. He'd never physically recoiled from his mother before, never broken the carefully maintained boundaries of their toxic dance. "Her people." The words came out sharp and cutting. "You mean my children's people? Half of their DNA? The woman I chose to marry, to build a life with?" I watched Gerald's hands curl into fists at his sides. The veins in his temples bulged, pulsing with each heartbeat. His breathing came faster, audible across the room. For a moment, I thought he might actually swing at Malcolm. Terrence must have sensed it too, because he stepped forward, positioning himself between me and his grandfather. "You're making a terrible mistake." Patricia's voice shook, but whether from anger or genuine distress, I couldn't tell. "When you come to your senses, when you realize what you've done, then I'll live with it." Malcolm walked to the door and pulled it fully open. "But I'm done living with this. With you treating Chanel like she's less than human. With you poisoning my kids with your racism disguised as concern." The word hung in the air. Racism. He'd finally said it out loud, acknowledged the elephant that had been crushing us for over 2 decades. My knees went weak, and I locked them to stay upright. Sienna moved to my side, her small hand finding mine. Her fingers were ice cold, trembling slightly. Gerald strode toward the door, his face twisted with contempt. "You'll regret this. When those mongrel children of yours turn on you like their kind, always does." Malcolm's fist connected with the doorframe inches from Gerald's face. The impact sent a sharp crack through the house. Splinters of wood exploded outward. Malcolm's knuckles split open, blood immediately welling up and dripping onto the floor in dark red drops. "Get out!" Patricia grabbed Gerald's arm and yanked him toward the porch. For the first time, genuine fear flickered across her face. She'd never seen Malcolm lose control, never witnessed him break through the careful politeness they'd instilled in him since childhood. They stumbled out into the evening darkness. Malcolm slammed the door behind them so hard that the decorative mirror in the entryway shattered, raining glass across the hardwood in a glittering cascade. The sound of their car doors opening and closing carried through the walls, followed by the engine roaring to life and tires squealing as they sped away. Malcolm stood frozen, staring at the blood dripping from his hand. His chest heaved with each breath. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold air that had filled the house. The red drops fell steadily, creating a small pool on the floor. I moved to him, grabbed his wrist, turned his hand over to examine the damage. 2 knuckles were split deep, the skin torn back to expose raw flesh beneath. He winced, but didn't pull away. "Come on." I led him toward the kitchen. "Terrence, get the first aid kit from the bathroom. Sienna, grab some ice." They scattered immediately, grateful for concrete tasks. Malcolm followed me docilely, his fight completely spent. I positioned him at the sink and turned on the cold water, guiding his hand under the stream. He hissed as the water hit the wounds, blood swirling pink down the drain. "I should have done that years ago." His voice came out hollow. "Should have protected you all from them." I pressed clean gauze against his knuckles, applying pressure until the bleeding slowed to a seep. The white fabric turned crimson in patches, and I wrapped it tighter, watching Malcolm's jaw clench with each adjustment. Terrence returned with the battered metal kit we'd kept under the bathroom sink for 15 years, its hinges creaking as I opened it. The antiseptic spray hit Malcolm's torn skin with a sharp hiss. His whole body went rigid, muscles tensing from his forearm up through his shoulder, but he kept his hand steady over the sink. Sienna placed a bag of frozen peas wrapped in a dish towel on the counter beside me. Her eyes were still wet, mascara smudged beneath them in dark crescents. She hadn't stopped shaking since the confrontation ended, her fingers trembling as she pulled back from the counter and crossed her arms tight against her chest. I wound gauze around Malcolm's hand in careful loops, securing it with medical tape that stuck to my own fingers as much as to the bandage. The simple task grounded me, gave my hands something to do, while my mind raced through the wreckage of what had just happened. My in-laws had driven 3 hours to deliver their poison, to plant seeds of doubt in my children's minds with lies so cruel they'd shattered the foundation of our family in a single evening. The house felt different now, violated. The air itself seemed heavy with the residue of their accusation, their fictional story about adoption papers and hidden truths. I finished tying off the bandage and pressed the bag of frozen vegetables against Malcolm's swelling knuckles. He took it from me, held it there himself, and leaned back against the counter with his eyes closed. "Where are Evelyn and Jordan?" The question came from Terrence, who stood in the doorway still clutching the empty first aid kit. "They went upstairs when they heard everything." My stomach dropped. In the chaos of Malcolm's explosion and his parents' retreat, I'd lost track of our 2 youngest. They'd been in the living room when Malcolm's mother had started talking, when she'd woven her elaborate fiction about secret adoptions and forged birth certificates. Evelyn was only 13. Jordan just turned 11 last month. I moved past Terrence and took the stairs 2 at a time, my knees protesting the sudden exertion. The hallway stretched ahead, doors closed on both sides. Light showed under Evelyn's door at the end, and I could hear muffled voices inside. I knocked twice before pushing it open without waiting for permission. Both kids sat on Evelyn's bed, surrounded by stuffed animals and posters of pop stars I couldn't name. Jordan's face was blotchy and red, tears still streaming down his cheeks. Evelyn had her arm around his shoulders, but her own expression held something worse than tears. A calculating wariness that didn't belong on a 13-year-old's face. "Are you?" Jordan's voice cracked on the words. "Are we really adopted?" I crossed the room and knelt in front of them, my knees sinking into the plush carpet. The position put me below their eye level, forced them to look down at me instead of up. I needed them to see my face clearly, to watch every muscle and movement as I answered. No, you are not adopted. Any of you. I reached out and took Jordan's hand, felt how cold his fingers were. Your grandmother lied. She lied because she's angry, because she wanted to hurt us. But why? Evelyn's wariness sharpened into something harder. Why would she say that if it wasn't true? Why would she make up something so specific? The question cut deep because it was exactly what any intelligent person would ask. Malcolm's mother hadn't just thrown out a vague accusation. She'd provided details, mentioned dates, talked about sealed records and falsified documents. She'd built a framework of lies sophisticated enough to seem plausible. I sat back on my heels, feeling the strain in my lower back. Because sometimes people would rather destroy everything than admit they're wrong about something. Your grandparents never wanted your father to marry me. They fought it for years, said horrible things, made threats. When we had children anyway, when we built this family despite them, it became proof they'd lost control. Jordan wiped his nose on his sleeve, leaving a wet streak across the fabric. But you could show us. You could show us our birth certificates right now and prove it. I can. I will. I stood up, my joints popping with the movement. They're in the safe in our bedroom. Come on. All three of us moved down the hall to the master bedroom at the front of the house. Malcolm and Terrence had followed us upstairs, and now Malcolm leaned in the doorway watching as I knelt in front of the closet safe. My fingers fumbled with the combination, missing the correct sequence twice before the lock clicked open. Inside sat our important documents in labeled folders: mortgage papers, insurance policies, passports, and birth certificates. I pulled out the folder marked birth records and spread the certificates across the bed. 5 of them, each embossed with the official state seal, each listing my name and Malcolm's in the parent fields. Jordan grabbed his first, holding it up to the light from the bedside lamp as if he could detect forgery through the paper's texture. His birth date matched, his full name printed in official typeface, the hospital where I'd labored for 14 hours before he finally emerged, screaming and perfect. Evelyn picked up hers more slowly, scanning every line with that same calculating expression. She was looking for inconsistencies, for proof either way. The realization that my daughter couldn't simply trust my word, that she needed physical evidence, sent a fresh wave of rage through my chest, so intense my hands began to shake. These could be fake, though. Evelyn's voice was quiet but steady. If Grandma was telling the truth about falsified records, then these would look exactly like this. I snatched Evelyn's birth certificate from her hands with such force the paper made a sharp snapping sound in the air. The edges bent under my grip as I held it inches from her face, my arm trembling not from weakness, but from the effort of not screaming. You want more proof? The words came out jagged, barely controlled. Fine. I stormed past Malcolm, my shoulder connecting with his as I pushed through the doorway. Down the stairs, each footfall heavy enough to rattle the framed photos on the wall. The basement door stuck when I yanked it, swollen from humidity, and I wrenched it open hard enough that the handle cracked against the wall behind it. The wooden stairs creaked under my weight as I descended into the cool darkness, my hand slapping along the wall until I found the light switch. The fluorescent tubes flickered twice before illuminating the finished basement we'd converted into a family room years ago. Along the far wall stood floor-to-ceiling shelves Malcolm had built, filled with plastic storage bins labeled by year. I grabbed the rolling library ladder we'd installed and shoved it along its track until it stopped at the section marked 1996-2000. The bin for 1997 sat on the third shelf up. I climbed the ladder, my knees protesting, and hauled the container down. It was heavier than I remembered, packed with photo albums and VHS tapes and my old pregnancy journal. The bin hit the floor with a hollow thump as I dropped it, then immediately reached for the next one. 1998, then 1999. Each container landed with increasing force, the plastic lids popping loose, contents spilling across the carpet. Footsteps thundered down the stairs behind me. All 5 of them had followed: my children, my husband, my father-in-law. I ignored them and yanked open the first bin, pulling out the spiral-bound journal with its floral cover, now faded and creased. I'd documented every week of my pregnancy with Jordan, every symptom, every doctor's appointment, every ultrasound photo taped to the pages. I threw it at Jordan's feet. The book landed spine up, pages splaying open to reveal my handwriting from 23 years ago, describing morning sickness so severe I'd lost 12 pounds in the first trimester. The photo albums came next. I grabbed the thick leather-bound book that chronicled Jordan's first year and hurled it toward the couch. It struck the armrest and tumbled open, glossy pages revealing dozens of photos. Me, swollen and exhausted in a hospital gown, holding a red-faced newborn. Malcolm cutting the umbilical cord, his surgical mask pulled down, eyes wet with tears. My mother-in-law, that same woman who'd poisoned my children's minds tonight, standing beside my hospital bed, beaming as she held her first grandchild. "Look at them!" My voice cracked, too loud in the confined space. "Look at every single one!" I yanked out more albums, throwing them in rapid succession. Evelyn's baby book landed near her feet, followed by Micah's. Each one documented in obsessive detail, because that's what first-time mothers did, especially mothers who'd waited until their late 30s to have children. Ultrasound photos at 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 20 weeks. Professional maternity shoots where I posed in flowing dresses, my belly round and prominent. Hospital bracelets taped to pages alongside footprints and measurements taken minutes after birth. The VHS tapes came in a cascade, their black plastic cases clattering across the floor. I'd filmed everything back then, before smartphones made every moment instantly digital. Hours of footage capturing my expanding waistline, my changing body, the babies moving visibly beneath my skin. Malcolm had recorded my labor with Evelyn, the camera shaking as he tried to watch both monitor and me, catching my screams and pushes, and the moment the doctor lifted our daughter into view, still connected to me by the thick, twisted cord. I grabbed the sides of the bin and upended it completely. Everything tumbled out. Hospital bracelets still attached to tiny knitted caps, cards congratulating us on the births, pediatrician receipts, immunization records tracking every vaccine administered. The evidence of 3 pregnancies, 3 births, 3 children I'd grown inside my own body. Jordan had dropped to his knees, picking up his baby album with careful hands. His fingers traced over a photo of me nursing him, my face exhausted but radiating something he could clearly see even now. Micah stood frozen near the stairs, staring at an ultrasound image where his tiny fist was visible, pressed against the wall of my uterus. Evelyn remained motionless, her face unreadable. I climbed the ladder again, this time pulling down bins from 2001 and 2002. More albums, more journals, more documentation of lives I'd created. The physical toll those pregnancies had taken. The gestational diabetes with Micah. The placenta previa with Evelyn that had required bed rest for 6 weeks. The emergency C-section with Jordan when his heart rate dropped during labor. All of it recorded, all of it real, all of it undeniable. My hands found the small locked box I'd kept hidden behind the bins, the one containing items too personal even for family photo albums. The key still hung on my keychain, and I unlocked it with shaking fingers. Inside lay the positive pregnancy tests I'd saved from all 3 pregnancies. The plastic sticks yellowed, but the 2 pink lines still visible on each one. Beneath them, the hospital ID bracelets that had circled my wrist during labor. My name printed on each one alongside dates and medical record numbers. I held up Jordan's pregnancy test, the first one I'd ever taken, the one that had made me cry with joy in a pharmacy bathroom 24 years ago. Your grandmother is a liar. Each word came out deliberate, weighted. And you believed her over me. Story block 910. Jordan reached for the pregnancy test first, his fingers trembling as they made contact with the yellowed plastic. He turned it over in his palms, examining it like an archaeologist studying an ancient artifact. The angle of the light caught the faded pink lines just right, making them momentarily vivid again. His throat worked, swallowing hard, and he sank down onto the attic floor with his knees drawn up. Evelyn moved next, stepping through the scattered photographs until she reached the ultrasound image she'd been staring at. She picked it up with both hands, holding it close to her face. Her fingertip traced the outline of the tiny fist visible in the grainy black and white image, following the curve of what the label identified as her own hand 23 years ago. A tear dropped onto the glossy surface, and she wiped it away quickly, smearing the moisture across the corner. Micah's hand shot out suddenly, grabbing my wrist. His grip was fierce, almost painful. "Mom!" The single word cracked in the middle. "I'm sorry." I pulled my wrist free and descended the ladder, my legs shaking with each step. The wooden rungs creaked under my weight, familiar sounds in a house full of memories I'd apparently been the only one to treasure properly. At the bottom, I walked past all 3 of them without looking back, leaving the attic ladder extended, the evidence scattered across the floor like debris after a storm. The master bedroom door stood open, revealing the empty space where Thomas's dresser had been before he moved out 3 weeks ago. His side of the closet gaped like a missing tooth, hangers pushed to one end. I'd left everything exactly as it was the day he departed, unable to reclaim the space even though legally it remained mine. The divorce papers sat unsigned on my nightstand, buried under a stack of real estate magazines I'd been pretending to read. Footsteps echoed on the stairs behind me. Multiple sets, descending in uncertain synchronization. I grabbed the papers and my pen, moving to the kitchen table where light from the window illuminated the signature lines. The pen felt heavy, substantial, like a weapon I'd finally decided to wield. Jordan appeared in the doorway first, still clutching the pregnancy test. His face had transformed from the angry stranger who'd arrived yesterday into something younger, more vulnerable. The years seemed to have peeled away, revealing the boy who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms. "Don't." I signed my name across the first line, the ink flowing bold and certain. Evelyn entered next, carrying the ultrasound and one of the photo albums. She set them on the table beside the papers, her movements careful, reverent. The album fell open to a page showing her first birthday party, cake smashed across her delighted face, while I knelt beside her high chair, laughing. "We should have listened." Her voice came out hoarse. "We should have asked you first." I signed the second line, then the third. The pen moved across each required space with mechanical precision. 25 years of marriage dissolving into cursive loops and legal jargon. Micah stood in the hallway, his face pale, both hands pressed flat against the wall, as if bracing himself against an earthquake only he could feel. The documents complete, I stacked them neatly and slid them into the pre-addressed envelope my lawyer had provided. The seal strip peeled away easily, and I pressed it down with my palm, ensuring no gap remained. Standing, I grabbed my purse and car keys from the hook by the door. "Where are you going?" Jordan's voice rose with panic. The post office sat 12 minutes away. I'd calculated the drive time yesterday, planning this moment, knowing that witnessing their realization wouldn't be enough. Action was the only language left that held meaning. My hand closed around the doorknob, cool metal against my palm. "Mom, please!" Evelyn stepped forward, the album still clutched against her chest. "We were wrong. We know that now." I turned back then, looking at each of them in sequence. Jordan with his father's eyes and my stubborn chin, holding evidence of his own beginning like a talisman. Evelyn with my nose and her father's height, finally seeing what she should have recognized all along. Micah in the hallway, tears streaming down his face, looking younger than his 21 years. Your father made a choice, his parents made a choice, and you three made a choice. I pulled the door open, September air rushing in with the scent of cut grass and approaching autumn. Now I'm making mine. The envelope felt light in my hand despite the weight of what it contained. I descended the porch steps, crossed the driveway, and slid into my car. In the rearview mirror, all three of my children stood clustered in the doorway, their faces stricken. The ultrasound image rested on the hood of my car where Evelyn must have placed it, the paper fluttering slightly in the breeze. I backed out slowly, leaving it there on the driveway, one more piece of evidence they could examine in my absence. 6 months later. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window of my new apartment, casting geometric patterns across the countertop where I arranged fresh tulips in a ceramic vase. My fingers worked steadily, trimming each stem at an angle, the scissors making clean snipping sounds that echoed in the peaceful silence. The apartment smelled of coffee and the vanilla candle burning on the bookshelf, scents I'd chosen deliberately, creating an atmosphere that belonged entirely to me. I stepped back, examining the arrangement. The tulips leaned slightly left, imperfect and beautiful. My reflection caught in the window glass, hair newly cut in a shorter style that framed my face. Silver strands I'd stopped coloring months ago. Laugh lines around my eyes that seemed deeper now, earned through genuine smiles rather than forced ones. The divorce papers had been finalized in November. Curtis had signed everything without contest, his signature appearing next to mine on documents that dissolved 34 years in neat legal language. His parents had called twice, both times leaving voicemails I'd deleted without listening past the first few words. Some conversations held no purpose beyond reopening wounds. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from my book club reminded me about tonight's meeting. I'd joined in October, walking into a room of strangers and introducing myself simply as Chanel, without the weighted qualifiers of wife or mother. The women had welcomed me with warm handshakes and recommendations for wine. We'd discussed literature and life, and nobody had asked me to justify my existence or prove my worth through biological connection. I picked up my coffee mug, the ceramic warm against my palms, and moved to the small balcony overlooking the courtyard. 3 floors below, a young mother pushed a stroller along the walking path, her movements unhurried, peaceful. I watched without the sharp ache that would have seized my chest 6 months ago. The pain had transformed into something quieter, a distant echo rather than a constant scream. My laptop sat open on the bistro table where I'd been working before sunrise. The memoir I'd started writing in January filled 63 pages now, words flowing easier each morning as I documented not just the pain, but the discovery of self that followed. A literary agent had requested the full manuscript after reading my first 3 chapters, her email expressing interest in authentic voices exploring family trauma and recovery. The doorbell rang. I set down my coffee and crossed the living room, passing walls I'd painted sage green, artwork I'd chosen from local galleries, furniture that fit my body and preferences rather than anyone else's aesthetic. Through the peephole, I saw Lydia from 4B holding a covered dish. I made too much lasagna. She thrust the container toward me when I opened the door, her smile genuine and uncomplicated. Thought you might want some. Thank you. I accepted the dish, still warm, the weight of it substantial in my hands. Join me for coffee? She glanced at her watch, then nodded. 20 minutes, then I've got a conference call. We sat on my balcony, 2 women in their 60s who'd each rebuilt lives after marriages ended. Lydia talked about her daughter's upcoming wedding, the complicated emotions of celebration mixed with memories of her own failed marriage. I listened, offering observations when asked, comfortable in the silence when she paused to collect her thoughts. After she left, I returned to my laptop. My fingers hovered over the keys, then began typing the next chapter, words about reclamation and rediscovery. The cursor blinked steadily, patient, waiting for whatever truth I chose to tell next. An envelope had arrived yesterday, forwarded from my old address. I'd recognized Jordan's handwriting immediately, the careful script he'd learned in elementary school when I'd spent hours teaching him proper letter formation. It sat unopened on my desk, white against the dark wood surface. I looked at it now, considering. My hand reached out, fingers touching the paper's edge. Then I pulled back, leaving it sealed. Whether I opened it today or tomorrow or next month mattered less than knowing I held the choice. The timeline belonged to me now, the pace of healing and potential forgiveness mine to dictate. I saved my document and closed the laptop. My yoga mat lay rolled in the corner, waiting for the afternoon class I'd committed to attending. Tonight's book club, tomorrow's volunteer shift at the community center, next week's pottery class starting on Tuesday. A life-constructed piece by deliberate piece, each element chosen because it brought me joy, or growth, or simple contentment. The tulips nodded gently in the breeze from the open balcony door. Outside, children laughed in the courtyard, their voices carrying upward. I finished my coffee, rinsed the mug, and changed into workout clothes. The day stretched ahead, full of small, purposeful actions, each one affirming the truth I'd learned, that I existed complete and worthy, regardless of who chose to recognize it. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.